The Feast of Fools, a colorful celebration in which the social order is turned upside down. Power and impunity are bestowed upon the downtrodden, the ignored, the silenced. The village idiot becomes the pope, deacons become bishops, the low are made lordly, and the lordly made low. It was a break from the continuous grind of piety expected from adherents to the church during the Middle Ages, a break from control and authority, a temporary lull. In the military, new recruits are subjected to a verbal barrage 6 days out of 7. Then they're given a break on the 7th. The reason why is that as long as people get a break, they'll endure any kind of depredation, reprieves, rest stops, liberty, shore leave. Subjecting people to pressure and then taking it off for brief moments teaches them to endure the impossible, endure the unspeakable, endure without rebellion. That's why the church had the Feast of Fools. In response to my previous video, How the Left Won, Part 3, a lot of people said that the right's recent victory in the presidential election is evidence that the left hasn't won. I wish I had been able to cover the Aluminum Company of America's story before the election, but I got sidetracked with my alleged destruction of the men's rights movement. So today, I'm going to cover the anatomy of the Church of Women Worsting and explain why the left never loses. Not even this time. There are two organizing forces that shape human society. The first force is gynocentrism, the tendency to center the protection and provision of women in order to further a society's reproductive aims. Until we find a society in which women are treated as expendable in the protection of men and in which women take on the riskiest tasks to acquire resources for men, all societies thus far discovered are organized around gynocentrism. A subset of gynocentrism was identified and codified by Charles Fourier when he coined feminism and defined it as judging social progress by the liberty afforded women. Fourier's feminism wasn't just an organizing force, it's also a moral principle. The feminist conception of social progress is that female liberty is an absolute good. All other considerations, including the freedom and safety of others or non-women, is subordinate to granting freedom to women. The second organizing force that shapes human society is resource acquisition. This force is represented by gross domestic product, corporate profit, piles of grain, cured meat, money. The reason why resource acquisition is the second organizing force of society is because throughout human history, human reproduction hasn't been limited by women, but by access to resources. Human offspring are the most resource-intensive offspring on the planet, so resource acquisition is a particularly acute biological imperative for us. Resources enable the pursuit of superior protection and provision for women as well. In fact, if one sees liberty as a resource, feminism is the moral imperative to afford women as much of the liberty resource as possible. However, resource acquisition only provides a counterbalance to gynocentrism, not a counter. Resource acquisition is not a moral imperative, like feminism. If resource acquisition is the engine, then feminism is the steering wheel. When we focus on fixing the engine, that doesn't mean we decided to get rid of the steering wheel, setting the direction of travel. The right represents our desire for resource acquisition and defense of those resources. The left represents our desire to give those resources to women. Another way to look at it is this. The left is like a rock climber, and the right is the anchor the rock climber sets into the rock. If the rock climber overreaches, she'll never fall further than the anchor point that she set in the rock. The left drives American society towards the goal of increased female liberty. When the resources run out, or our patience at being driven towards the left's goal is at an end, we elect a Republican candidate who will refocus briefly on fixing the engine, consolidating the moral gains that the left has made, and giving everyone those gains have cost a brief respite. As we ritually rebel and throw off tyranny, it's almost like we've triumphed over it, except we haven't. We just get the pretense of throwing off the yoke and sticking it to our leaders. We get a feast of fools. I'm going to offer a prediction here. The U.S.'s current Republican government will reverse none of the previous government's push towards greater female protectionism and liberty at the expense of non-women. The Lilly Ledbetter Act, the Dear Colleague letter, the enthusiastic consent standard, Title IX, erosions in due process for those accused of rape, VAWA, nope, it will all stand. And when the resource producers have had a bit of a break, the left will get back in the cab and start driving the U.S. towards its newest moral goal, its newest way of saving and freeing women simultaneously. The Republicans don't oppose the Democrats, or rather the right doesn't oppose the left. In fact, without the right, the left would likely end up being ousted in a true civil war because the populace would never get that needed break that compels them to endure. When you believe social progress is judged by the liberty of women, in order to make social progress, you have to be constantly liberating women. In order to constantly liberate women, women must be seen to always be in chains. Women worsting. Therefore, women always have it worse than men and are always needing to be saved from oppression. It doesn't matter the actual situation of women, women are always worse off and always needing to be saved. If that wasn't so, our society would enter a state of moral decay. Like sharks who need to keep swimming to breathe, we must keep saving women. Or, I don't know, I guess we all shed our human skins and become lizard people or something. Anyway, let's get on with the anatomy lesson. Churches form around unquestioned beliefs. Women worsting is an unquestioned belief. We can't question it because if we do, we're horrible misogynists. So let's start talking about the anatomy of the church that's formed around the unquestioned belief in women worsting. Oh, wait, just a second. The first important anatomical lesson is that the church is divided into two sects. Right here's, over there's. Women have it worse right here, or women have it worse over there. If you've paid close attention so far, you might notice that the sect of right here is approximately equivalent to the regressive left and feminism. The democratic curia exists comfortably within this sect. This sect also rules the church of women worsting for one simple reason. Satan is right here, right in the room with you, right now, breathing down the necks of your daughter, your mother, your sister, your wife. His fetid, foul breath on the nape of their neck, about to ravage them, about to take away their hopes and dreams, and render them helpless, broken. The reason why the right here sect rules is because there is nothing to compete with the immediacy of women being in horrible danger right where you are, right where you live, right now. I'll stop here to remind you that the ruling church of women worsting controls the steering wheel of society, society's moral direction. While the right may not control the steering wheel, it does control the engine, which means it can slow progress down or stop it briefly for servicing. It just can't change course. In fact, the only way the sect of right over there could gain control and the sect of right here lose control is with a ground war with a credible military threat. Then fear of men over there could eclipse the immediacy of fearing the men right here. And that would be because of the threat to not just our women, but also our resources. Until that happens, the sect of right here steers the show. On the top is the democratic curia. Or perhaps a better term is the liberal curia. They dominate the steering wheel, the direction of our society, since they control the moral imperative of women worsting. Although they are technically liberals, they don't represent classical liberals or any left-leaning people who don't believe morality should be judged on women's liberty and women's liberty alone. Below them is the priesthood. The academia is responsible for legitimizing the curia by finding new strains of women worsting for them to target. And also below them are the preachers, the media tasked with spreading the good word of always save the girl. Surrounding the priesthood are the zealots. who graduate from the church's education. They repeat the church's dogma by rote and do violence to those who question it. The church encouraged their emotional immaturity and dependency to preserve their black and white thinking. The zealots particularly dislike gamergaters and men's rights advocates. Men's rights advocates for questioning the priesthood, and gamergaters for questioning the preachers. There are two factions within the right here zealots. The first faction is the yes over there, but right here faction. They recognize women worsting over there, but they are far more concerned with women worst over here. This faction is generally seen in the more political arena because while it wants to keep its moral dominance over the Western rabble, it does enjoy moral dominance over the rest of the world as well. This faction is the old left. And the power of the yes over there, but right here, or old left faction, is waning a bit because there is a second faction of the right heres, and it is the strict right here faction. They're otherwise termed the regressive left. They either don't recognize the situation over there, or they find it particularly expedient not to care. An example of a strict right here faction are intersectional feminists and those who regard Sharia law as feminist. This requires a bit of an explanation. According to intersectionality, Muslim men are tremendously disadvantaged by the wealthy white men who control the West. Intersectionality allows feminist women in the West to use the plight of Muslim men as a way of shaming their targets, the wealthy Western white men whose power they want to control, into compliance. However, the situation for Muslim women becomes problematic because it paints Western men in a better light than Muslim men. Enter the mental gymnastics to erase Muslim women's lack of equal rights. Abracadabra! Sharia law is feminist, and the situation in the Middle East is rendered useful as a tool of social control of white Western men. This is why intersectionality exists. It doesn't exist because of who it purports to help, but who it has the ability to exert moral dominance over. Men, in particular white men, but in general all men. Men are both the body of the car and the fuel in its engine. It is critically important for the church to exert moral dominance over men because otherwise it might lose the ability to dictate the moral course of society. Intersectionality serves to delegitimize and justify marginalizing the issues of black, Asian, and poor men while exerting tremendous moral force on wealthy white men. It's thus the perfect tool of control. It reduces minority and class issues down to those that are relevant to feminist women and enables them to ignore those men who are not useful and dominate those men who are. Regardless of the cost to the minority and poor communities feminists exploit in extracting their moral capital. The usefulness of this is why intersectionality is gaining traction in the church, although it does have one possibly unintended side effect, because it's creating a separate faction in the over there's. The old right are lax over theirs. They are, yes, right here, but over there. In other words, they recognize the men in our society are oppressive, but they want to focus on what they perceive as more of a threat. Men over there who might rape and abuse our women and take our resources. You'll notice that the old right generally agrees with women worsting in our society along with the old left. However, there's currently a faction in the over there's that is growing in relation to the strict right here's, what the liberals term alt-right. They are strict over theirs. In other words, they disbelieve that the men they have personal experience with are a problem, but they do believe that those men they don't have personal experience with are a problem. For them, women worst is solely a problem over there. This faction exists as a reaction to the strict right here's, the new left's moral overreach, just as the right is a reaction to the left's financial overreach. And just like the old right can agree with church orthodoxy without particularly enjoying tithing to the church and complaining about the church's spendthrift ways, the strict over theirs can agree with the orthodoxy without particularly enjoying the church's authoritarian control over their life or its attempt to exert authoritarian control. The strict over theirs, in fact, don't oppose the church orthodoxy for rational or principled reasons. They don't oppose it because the orthodoxy prevents questioning or because it's exploitative towards men and women, both. They oppose it because they think the zealots are stupid and they want to laugh at them. They oppose it because they want to feel superior to the structure that rules it. They oppose it because they don't like the control it exerts over their lives. But ultimately, the strict over theirs don't oppose the church at all. This is why. If you say men outside of the church's control over there, or back then, were bad, if you say every man but the men under the church's control were bad or are bad, then you are supporting the church's control over men. Duh! If you say the women over there or back then are enslaved and only the women under the church rule are free, then you are also supporting the church's rule over women. Duh! Like a Republican win in the government is a release valve for ensuring the democratic or liberal curia continues to control the direction of our society, the fame and attention strict over theirs get, who oppose the right here zealots, is another form of release valve that only serves to support our continued subjugation. We laugh at the zealots and their antics. Post-Trump PTSD. I am literally shaking, and hug your minority friends, and on and on and on. Trump's win has upset all the right people. That's what's said. But what if it hasn't? The zealots currently rioting in the streets are idiots. Zealots make no sense outside of their context. They are insane or terminally stupid, but they make perfect sense if they're part of a larger structure. They exist to enforce the church's will by reducing everything down to black and white and red. Red for those flags that make them charge like bulls at whatever's triggering them. And the media threw a red flag on Trump. But what if that's the point? But what if they're also here to make us think that something's changed when it hasn't? What if they're a diversionary tactic? If you look at Trump's policies, he's center-right, and that's being extremely generous. This election has basically been between a Democrat from back then versus a Democrat from right now. There's a reason why the Republican establishment doesn't like him. I'll remind you of the metaphor of the climber putting in an anchor so she only falls so far if she overreaches. The real difference politically, not ethically, politically, between Hillary and Trump has been the media. Specifically, the red flag the media threw on Trump, the demonization, the spurious claims of racism and sexism. Never before has the media been this biased against a Republican candidate, or this obviously so, all while excusing the malfeasance of the opposite candidate. Yet never before have two political candidates been so close on the actual issues. The Feast of Fools is a release valve. The church puts us all in a pressure cooker and then gives us a festival to take the pressure off. So we learn to endure instead of rebel, which invites a question. If the zealots in the streets are there to provide a distraction and make us all think something has been accomplished, then what pressure, what new form of control is Trump the release valve for? I guess it all hinges on one thing. Do you trust the media to lie honestly?